Hi, I'm Lauren, and today I'm sharing with you some beginner tips for getting started in brush lettering. I'm going to share all of my favorite tools, how to use them, some practice strokes that you can use at home, and how to apply all of those things into real-life items like envelopes and personal stationery. So first we're going to go over all of the tools and materials I use. We're going to start with these brushes. I like to stick with round brushes. Sometimes I'll alternate in a spotter brush. So these are all the various sizes I use. These two are what you're going to be lettering with. They're very, very tiny. They're an 18-0 round brush and a 12-0 round brush. They basically have the same length of bristles, and that's kind of what you want to look for when you're shopping for your brushes. You want to use a round brush, make sure it's short enough. If you get too long, it's going to start flipping on the paper and it's going to be harder to work with. So these brushes, you can also letter with them if you're doing something larger scale, like maybe you're doing a big quote print or a sign for a wedding. But what I use these for mostly is just to get the water into my paint and get the paint coming up in the palette. I typically use a number 2 for this, but I also have a number 8 if you're, starting your color and you're having a little harder of a time getting that water in there. The larger the brush, the more water it holds. So you don't want to use these for mixing because you're not going to be able to transfer as much color into the paint. You want to stick with a larger brush. That also means that when you're actually painting or writing, you're going to have to dip these smaller brushes a lot more often than you would the larger brush. So next we're gonna look at the paint that I use. This is a very basic palette from your local craft store. You can get these almost anywhere. When you're just beginning and you're practicing, this is a great way to start. So this is a pretty good selection. What you can also do with these colors is dip your larger brush in here and use these little palettes to mix them. So if you're trying to get a color for a special project you're working on, you can always mix these up over in this palette. This is my brush lettering guide. We have these kits available with paint and brushes and everything you need to get started. We also sell a few of these sheets as a download, so I'll link to those in the description if you guys want to download those today and use them while you're practicing. What we're going to be working most with are these practice strokes. This is always a really great exercise to come back to if you're not understanding how your brushes work, where you press down, how you get the thick strokes versus the thin strokes. So this is what we'll be going over, and this will really help you build that base knowledge for creating the letters later. And then after we do that, we'll quickly go over the alphabet so you can see how I shape each letter. And then we will be going into the envelopes and personal stationery so you can understand how you can put all of this to use in real life. So to get started, we need to work some water into your color palette. Take the biggest brush you have. I'm going to use a number 8 round brush. And I'm just going to dip that in the water, pick a color, we'll go here, and drop some water on there. Do that a couple times, and then start to work that water into the paint. Don't press too hard, that will cause more of the paint to come up and it'll be more opaque. You want to have a nice contrast between the water and the paint. So then we'll do a couple test strokes, work that in a tiny bit, and come over here and just make a few lines. This is great. You'll see a nice variation of your darker color and your lighter color. That's kind of the whole point of watercolor lettering, is that variance, so you really want to stay consistent with this. If I didn't use enough water, this is what it would look like. You're going to get that thick, opaque color, and you don't get a lot of variance if you're not using or not working in enough paint into your water. You're going to get something too light like this. So now that you have your paint consistency correct, we're going to go ahead and dive into all of the practice strokes. So again, you can download these or you can just follow along here. They're pretty simple. So basically what this is doing is teaching you how you use the pressure when you're holding the brush and how that's going to help you achieve upstrokes and downstrokes. And that's kind of what you see in traditional calligraphy, is that variance of a smaller thin line versus the thicker line. So the smaller line is your upstroke, that will always be thin, and the thicker line is your downstroke, that will always be thick. So once you have your paint ready, you can grab one of your lettering brushes. I'm gonna go ahead and use the 18-0 round brush. Dip that in the water a little bit, kind of test the color out again, make sure it's where you want it. And we're gonna start with the straight downstrokes. And I want you to practice the pressure that you're applying to the brush. So more pressure makes a thick line, less pressure makes a thin line. I want you to make a couple lines down the sheet, practicing thin to thick. I typically dip back in the paint once or twice per letter, so that would equate to maybe 1 or 2 lines here. So the next line we're working on are going to be the angled upstrokes. On upstrokes, you don't want to apply too much pressure. You want them to be as thin as possible. And you always want to be pulling away from the tip of the brush. You never want to be pushing, always pulling. So keep that in mind when you're practicing your upstrokes. No pressure, simply pulling them straight up. So next we're going to combine the downstroke with the upstroke and make this U pattern. Here you're going to press down with all of your pressure, let off at the bottom, and come up with no pressure. Dip your brush, start back up at the top, pressure, let off, come up with no pressure, and dip. Put all your pressure, let off, and come up. So now we're going to keep going, combining the upstroke and the downstroke, but this time we're going to try and make an angle at the top. So it's sort of like an upside down V. So you'll start with your upstroke, no pressure, and then press down coming out to the side. Dip your brush, come up with no pressure, and press down. No pressure on your upstroke, all the pressure on your downstroke. So the next line is similar to the U, upside down, but I want you, instead of trying to create a point at the top of those, you're going to go in a continuous motion, practicing your upstroke and your downstroke. So here's your upstroke, no pressure. Start the pressure here, coming down. Let off at the bottom, make a U, and come up with no pressure. Dip here. Go back through to connect the paint. Press down, let off at the bottom, and come up. So this is where you're going to learn how to make those transitions. You're going to want to use water so that you don't get these really heavy transition marks. You can go back in with a little water and blend it. Come back through. You don't have to press down exactly where you were, but that'll help blend this transition. So for our last practice stroke, we're just gonna apply the same theories that we're using here with the thin and the thick, but I want you to practice it in a horizontal line. So there's no pressure here. Start applying pressure and come down all the way, full pressure. Let off, come back to your thin stroke. You can dip here. No pressure, start pressing down, let off to your thin stroke. Now that we've gone over all of the practice strokes, we're going to put those principles to work here in the alphabet. So here's your first downstroke, lift up at the bottom, and there's your upstroke. Dip here. Here's your downstroke, let off at the bottom, and come up. So now that you have all of your basics down, I'm going to show you how to apply those to real life products. We're going to start with an envelope. We're going to work on a little personal stationery, and at the end we'll do a quote. So that's it. I hope all of these tips help you guys on your lettering journey. We have a full brush lettering kit in the shop if you want to get all of these tools in one package and in the book to practice with. We also have downloadable worksheets that you can download today to practice with. Stay tuned for more lettering tutorials, and thanks for joining me today. See you next time.